And we're on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your most recent webinar for the Community Broadcasting Association of Australia, supported as always by our colleagues at the Community Media Training Organisation. Tonight's session, Acma Licence Renewal 101. Tonight's session will be presented by the CBAA's Member Services and Marketing Engagement Assistant, Holly Friedlander-Lidicote, and will include special guests Phyllis, Amy and Juliet from the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the ACMA. That's the ACMA there in the Acma Licence Renewal. I shouldn't call it Acma, should I? I should call it ACMA. And looking at me like I don't even know what I'm talking about. And that's really weird because my name is Danny Chifley of the Community Broadcasting Association for Australia, a man who, according to my biography, has over 20 years of experience in the community broadcasting sector. Am I learning something every day? You better believe I am. And I'm looking forward to learning something this evening. I better hand it over to Holly, I think. Let's hand it over to a professional for once. I think that'd be refreshing, wouldn't it? Holly, hopefully you're hearing me, and hopefully in a second I'll be hearing you.
Thanks, Danny. I think there's definitely maybe 1.5 professionals in the room tonight, and welcome to everybody that has joined us so far. A big hello to Greg from Inner FM, Lucy from Radio Adelaide, Jeff from Radio Eastern in Melbourne, Annette from 5GTR, and everyone else who joined us earlier this evening. It's so lovely to have you here. Hope FM in Esperance, welcome. Let's get straight into it, shall we? So we're going to chat tonight about the ACMA license renewal and go through a bit of a 101, and we're going to look at sort of what it is, some tips for getting your license renewal together to hopefully make it an easier process for you and your station, and the checklist, the bits and pieces that you need. And of course, we'll hear from Amy at the ACMA, and Phyllis will be jumping in as well to answer any and all questions. So don't be afraid to pop those in the chat box as we go along tonight. Oh, there we go. There's the slide saying the things that I just did. But yes, they are what you'll learn tonight. So let's get into it. So every permanent broadcaster needs to complete a license renewal with the Acma every 5 years, except if you are a remote Indigenous organisation. And what that looks like is by completing a form that is called the B66 form, which Danny has very kindly put in the chat box for you. And we'll send around some resources at the end of the webinar as well, so you have them in a really easy and accessible place. The form was updated last year, and we worked with the Acma to hopefully make that form a little bit clearer of what you need to provide. So we want to ensure that that process is as easy as possible for stations. When is the application due? So applications for the renewal must be made 1 year before the license is due to expire. So if your license is due to expire on the 30th of December 2019, then your renewal application is due on the 30th of December 2018. And the ACMA will provide you with a reminder notice sort of 13 to 14 months before the license expiry date, so about 1 to 2 months before it's due. And if you're a CBAA member, we'll also send you a reminder notice as well. That'll generally come from myself, and we'll give you some resources. In terms of filling out the form, it's obviously important to complete all questions. So if you forget something, it might make that process with the ACMA a little bit longer. And please feel free to call us if you have questions, or the ACMA. They're very, very helpful people and want to help ensure that you get that license renewal together. It's also important to, of course, keep a copy of your work. I know sometimes stations tell me that they didn't do the last renewal because they weren't there 5 years previous, which of course happens a lot. So it's really important, if you're the one person doing it at your station, if you keep a copy of your work, that could be really useful if you're not there then for the next renewal, and somebody else can then use that to sort of see what was done previous and build or change that for the next renewal. Of course, it's important to label supporting documents correctly. So the form will very clearly say how to do so. But for example, a document in support of an answer to question 7 must be marked Appendix 7. So laying out your documents really clearly as the form instructs will really help make that process a lot easier for both yourself and for the person looking at that renewal. I think that's it for the bit of the overview. So getting right into the nitty-gritty of the form. Actually, before that, I just wanted to mention one more tip that we had, which some stations find really useful, is consider keeping a folder on your computer or the station's computer called License Renewal, and save documents in there as you go throughout the year and the years that you might need. So these could be things like your financial statements and AGM minutes. And that will really just help you when your license renewal comes up. You're not sort of scrambling to find 3 or 4 or 5 years worth of documents. You'll hopefully have them in that one good place, or at least a basis, and then you can move onwards from there to continue finding out what you may need. But like everything, Danny and I like to remind people all the time, documentation is key. So always try and keep a record of everything. So documents. What documents do stations need to provide in their renewal? You'll need to include your most recent weekly program schedule, showing the applicable dates. And as I said, this will be a little bit of information, and I'll send it around to you at the end of it as well. And of course, jump in if you've got questions. You'll need to submit an application form for a program proposal. So that is, how do people apply at the station for a program? What's the sort of procedure there? Your current constitutions or articles of association or rules, whatever it may be for your organisation, and a certificate of registration. And we've got some resources around constitutions and things like that if you so need. A diagram of the organisation structure showing the board management committee and the committees and subcommittees, as well as any staff positions if you have them. So the ACMA is just wanting to see how your organisation works really clearly. A list of current members of the board or management committee, including indicating the term of each member. The minutes of the last 2 AGMs. And again, we've got some great resources on keeping minutes if you need a bit of a brush up there. A membership application form showing membership categories and a schedule of membership fees. Again, so the ACMA understands how that works at your station. A list of staff positions, and that's both paid and volunteer. I know a lot of stations are predominantly, if not all, volunteer run, especially a few in the chat box there. So that is, if people have positions, station manager, sponsorship manager, these kinds of things, whether they're paid or unpaid. Audited financial statements for 2 years, or unaudited if you're not required to audit. A 5-year business plan and a 5-year budget, and any outstanding renewal actions. So that's from your last license renewal. Sometimes when you're renewing a license, the ACMA will renew your license and then say, this is great, but we would like you to consider amending A, B, and C. Could you please do that by your next renewal or this particular date? And Amy might touch on that a bit later in the presentation. But if there's anything outstanding that the ACMA has asked you to do, it's highly recommended that you do it. And the policies. So again, we put this as a bit of a list just to make it really easy for you. Corporate governance, which I might come back to at the end because corporate governance is quite a broad one, but you'll need a membership policy, and these are all things that you need to provide as outlined in the Community Broadcasting Codes of Practice. So that's where this requirement comes from. So you'll need a membership policy, you'll need an internal conflict and grievance policies, you'll need complaints handling, community participation, programming, volunteering, and sponsorship. And in terms of corporate governance is such a broad topic, and it covers everything that you might need from how to conduct meetings, transparency, accountability, risk management, reimbursement, you know, the list goes on. And these are all the things that will really just help your organization run as effectively as possible. So whichever corporate governance templates you have, please include them. Danny's put a link up to some templates that are freely available on our website, and for CBAA members, we can get you access to particularly corporate governance policies, whichever ones you may need. So just let Danny or I know. There's some other resources as well that'll help you, but I might come back to that at the end, and I might hand over to Amy at the ACMA to take you through her part of the presentation.
Thank you, Holly.
Let me just pull up this slideshow. One moment.
I better check to make sure that I've got the right microphone for you, Amy. Check 1, 2. No, that's not that microphone.
That one?
How's this one?
Check 1, 2.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, we found. Okay, so there's just a cover slide there. Okay, there's where we're going to start. That's great. Hi, I'm Amy. I'm from the Community Broadcasting Safeguard section of the ACMA, so thanks for having me. I wanted to just come at this from a slightly different perspective so that you get an understanding of what the ACMA is looking for and why we ask you for some of the things we do. The information that we ask for on the B66 renewal form and what the ACMA is looking for is very transparent. It's essentially an assessment of whether the licensee still meets all the criteria in Section 84.2 of the Broadcasting Services Act. And that is the list that you can see of Section 84.2 on the slide there. So while the licensees have to satisfy all the criteria, most of the B66 questions and most of the documents we ask you for go to the first 4 of those criteria, A to D. So we'll spend most time dealing with those. And I will end up with some doubling up on what Holly said, but there's some points that deserve reiteration. So just to note, this is not a once in 5 year thing. You can't just do nothing for 4.5 years and then suddenly expect to catch up when it's time to lodge your B66. And this applies both to how you operate your station and during the license period and to the records that you keep of what you're doing. So more on that later, but I agree with Holly's statement about keeping records. Some things to note about the ACMA's assessment of your application. We're assessing how you're performing. And then we're going to assess how your station is performing against other stations of a similar nature. So, for example, that sort of depends on whether your station is a metro or a regional or a remote in a remote license area. So it's comparing apples with apples. We do refer to the CBAA's data, which is the Community Broadcasting Sector Programming and Community Development Census from June 2014, and the Community Broadcasting Stations Sector Financial Health of Community Radio Survey for the 2015-16 financial year. We look at the data like for the number of members and volunteers, how much music versus spoken word is broadcast, your station's average income and expenditure for each type of station, whether they're metro or regional or what have you. And that helps us gauge how accessible and responsive your station is to your community and how viable and sustainable into the future you are, and how healthy you are compared with others in your same sort of category. And then from that, we're looking at whether you're sound for us to renew your licence. Turning to the B66 form, the info that we're collecting at Section 3 of the B66 questions 8 to 9, that covers Section 84.2A and B. In this piece, you can't prove to the ACMA that you're meeting community needs and interests unless you can show us what the key needs and interests are. And you can't tell us what they are unless you've actually asked your community. So we want to know what you know about your community's needs and interests, how you found out about them, and what you're doing about it. We'll have a slide change, please. Thank you. Question 8 has a lot of examples of how you might find out this important information and use it. And so you've got checkboxes there to prompt you. The ACMA's participation guidelines also has useful ideas. We prefer stations to have a community consultation strategy, which is sometimes known as a CCS, and a structured engagement program, an SEP. They're good evidence of what your station's been doing and what you intend to do during the licence period. And if we think a lot of stations start to employ these, that perhaps we could find those SEP and CCS replacing some of the questions on the B66 in future. So something to get on board with. Please remember that this is about all the people in your licence area, not just your current listeners and members and volunteers. It's all about the broader community in your licence area. Moving on to Section 4 of the B66, questions 10 to 12. This covers section 84.2c, and it's about how your service adds to the nature and diversity of other broadcasting services that are available in the area. So we're mainly concerned about how programming in your station is different from what's provided by other stations. So if you're providing music for youth, but they can get that on Triple J, you'd have to ask yourself, why are you also providing youth programming? Is it because you have maybe a really large youth population? Or is there a gap somewhere that your station can find to fit something in to complement what's already available on other stations? So this is why we ask you questions about how much of your own broadcast material you produce locally, i.e. within your license area, what kinds of programs you produce locally, whether they're music or spoken word, which community needs and interests they serve, where you source the rest of your material. So are you getting stuff from CRN, or is it syndicated on other community stations outside your license area? How much of it comes from overseas? Question 12, and we'll ask how you find and choose new programs. So that was program proposals, which Holly mentioned before, and who makes the decisions on what to broadcast. So maybe committee structures. In question 10, Holly mentioned that we ask you for a copy of your recent weekly broadcast schedule, and this forms the basis of your answers for question 10 and 11. So we're looking at this pretty exciting, colourful slide. We might go, is the slide before? Yeah, that's better. Thank you. I'll change in a sec. Please don't assume that we know what your golden oldies or your mystery train program consists of. We need to have program descriptions, so please avoid mystery. When you're responding to the section of the form, imagine that you're describing the programs to someone who's never heard them before, because we haven't had the pleasure of visiting all of your license areas and hearing all of your wonderful work. So please give us a rundown on what each program is and what value it has for your community. When you're filling in the table on question 10, you please read the info that's marked with the asterisk beneath the table, and that tells you what's meant to go in each box. And I've also done this little colour coding thing, which I'll talk about in a sec. A week equals 168 hours, and your program schedule should also equal 168 hours. So the information that you're using to populate this table should match up with your program schedule in total 168. And we do check which ones have a presenter and what doesn't, and what comes from CRN. So it's important that you are upfront with us. If you want to choose a colour to represent each box, and then flick over to, we can go one more slide forward, and then transpose that onto your program, then you'll be able to easily divvy up what goes where, and you can see the magazine programs that have a mix of talk and music done 50-50 on the diagonal. So that gives you a way of saying that if it's a 3-hour slot, you would allocate 1.5 hours to your count of each kind of spoken word and music. Please note that the Australian produced music programming does not mean Australian music quota and does not mean Australian music content. That's something that you report separately to APRA AMCOS that's covered by the broadcasting codes. So what the Australian produced music programming means is music programs that are produced in Australia. Okay, flicking on, we can go to section 5. Section 5 has questions 13 to 18. We're assessing your capacity to continue to provide a service. So this is your management, your financial and technical and compliance capacity to continue running your service. Question 13 asks you for a lot of lists and diagrams of who does what, who are the office bearers, who's on the board, subcommittees, who makes the decisions. And what's really important about this is that every person associated with your station has a role as a member, as a volunteer, as a contractor, or a member of staff. So you need to know who is what and who is who. For example, a member can vote at station meetings, but a volunteer who's not a station member can't. So you need to differentiate. So for every name that you put in a diagram or your org chart or any list of who's on a committee, including people on management committees, please tell us whether they're members or volunteers, or if they're paid or unpaid. Really clearly identify everybody. So I've just highlighted some of those sections where it's really relevant. Question 14, one more slide, thank you. is about your members and volunteers. Please just read the form and make sure you know what is going in each box, because this is just a way of breaking down your members and volunteers into different subgroups. So it's quite self-explanatory, just please read the labels. And let's move to question 15. There's no slide for that. Question 15 is about your 5-year budget and your 5-year business plan. And these show that you've had some thought about what you're going to do with your future. And we'd like to know that you've had a thought about that, because we're thinking about renewing you for another 5 years. So if you've planned for something significant in your business plan, such as an antenna upgrade or something else significant or expensive, then also make sure that there's a provision for this in your budget, because we will check. And maybe ask your treasurer for if you need any help with your documentation in terms of the finances. Question 16, I'll skip that because most people seem okay with that, but you're welcome to ask questions later. And we'll just look at the compliance sections. We can have a slide change, please. Thank you very much. So questions 17 and 18, Holly's already touched on the question 17 bit, which is, did you get a letter from us 5 years ago asking you to do things, and have you done them? If not, then we need to know why. If so, you should have received notification that we were happy that you'd completed all of those actions and that they were fully implemented. So we're wanting to aim for you to not get another letter like that. Now is a good time. If you don't have all your policies in order, or if you don't have your constitution in order, or what have you, please start thinking about it now before you renew. Question 18 is one, thank you. Excuse me. This is a list of the policies, amongst other things, and you really are required to have all 8 of these. They're specified in the codes of practice, and they are mandatory. The appendices at the back of the codes have beautiful templates and examples that you can use. You can also ask the CBAA to help you out if you need help to develop or review your policies. They have online resources as well. They have a lot of experience, but you also need to make sure that you're tailoring your policy to your station. So please don't just copy a template from the back of the codes and assume that's going to be all perfect. Also bear in mind the station's constitution does not satisfy the requirement for a station to have policies under the codes. It's a separate document. Your constitution is not the policies. The policies have a separate but other purpose, and essentially they're all required. So we will chase you if we don't have them. That's kind of it for the form. And I just had a few tips, general tips, some of which Holly's mentioned. One of them is about having a folder where you keep all your documentation and where your management committee or board knows where it all is, especially if you need to do a handover if people change personnel on the committee. This is your references and resources base and should include your last letter from the ACMA advising that we renewed your license, any actions for implementation we asked you to do, your broadcast certificates, including for your STL links, and other things as you go along. The second point was that you should check the ACMA website for the latest B66 form, because we don't change it very often, but occasionally it might change and we want to make sure you're using the current form. Don't just use something on your hard drive. The next one is to be ready to lodge on time. You should be compiling and collecting and preparing yourself as you go along, and be ready to lodge 12 months before your expiry date. If there's some drastic unforeseeable reason why you cannot lodge on time, please give us a call. We want you to stay in touch. We don't want you to hide. Make sure that you can send us whatever you have, and then we will perhaps be able to give you an extension, and you can submit the rest as you can get it together. But really, we'd like you to get it to us before when the 12 months is ready. Also about labelling, Holly mentioned labelling. Please label everything. We need to know what question it belongs to. We need to know what kind of document it is, especially when we have so many appendices. And the last one is we'd really prefer a soft copy of your B66 and your supporting documents, and it's preferable if you can to submit it all in one email, maybe as a zip file, or stick it on a USB post it. Like if you send multiple emails with little documents attached here and there, it's much easier for things to go astray, or it's much harder to keep track of what everything is. So we'd absolutely prefer it if you can do one bundle and label everything. I'll just say that again, label everything, please. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Amy. I think I'm going to hand it back over to you now, Holly. Of course, the question's gone there. The slide has popped up about questions.
And we do have a great question here from Denise on how early would you like an application submitted. So Denise, if your application is due on the 30th of December 2019, as an example, if your license expires on the 30th of June 2019, your application for renewal would be due on the same day but a year previous. So exactly 12 months before. That will ensure that you get that submission in on time. If you've got more questions, please pop them in the chat box. And before we get that, I wanted to just touch on a few resources. And first of all, thank you so much, Amy, for that detailed and wonderful and clear explanation. That was really excellent. It was great to walk through the B66 form. And if you've got questions, as I said, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Danny and I have looked at that form many a time and helped many a broadcaster, so please don't hesitate to give the CBAA a call. But a few resources that might help you in your planning for your license renewal. The first one is the Station Community Engagement Survey. So Amy mentioned that community engagement is defined as not just how you are engaging your community, but how do you not know your community unless you're asking them who they are and what they like. And that community, as she mentioned, is not just your listeners. It's not just your volunteers. It's not just your members, but it's your whole community. It's everyone in your license area plan. And so the CBAA worked really hard with the sector to develop a really affordable do-it-yourself, easy survey that stations can use to find out what their community, who they are, what they like, their demographics, all these kinds of things. And especially if you've got a changing community, this is one way that you can go about asking your community who they are and what they need, getting that information, and then making sure that your community is represented at your station, making sure that their favorite genres, but they're represented, their favorite types of talks, content, but of course that they are also represented, that they're members of your board or your programming committee or wherever it may be. So Station Community Engagement Survey, that's a great resource. Resources for improving community engagement, that's one of them, but we've also got the codes of practice. So the codes of practice that has obviously the policies that you need, but as Amy said, some great templates and appendices that you may need for developing your policies. The ACMA also have a not-for-profit guidelines, which can help understand some of your responsibilities. And the participation guidelines that Amy also mentioned earlier. And again, we'll share some links to you. I believe Danny's in the chat box doing that, but so you have all this in one handy place. Some compliance resources. So the CBAA, we have a resource library on our website, and in the compliance section, all kinds of great things about how to keep good minutes, how to comply with charity regulation if you're a charity, all these kinds of things that you may need. And we're always looking to grow that resource library too, so if you can't find what you're looking for, just let us know. HR support as well. As I said, there's some great free templates available on our website, and for CBAA members as well, we can get you any template you may need, particularly around governance, so just let us know. And we have a great CMTO fact sheet on the website, which again, I'll link it to you, but that's a bit of things to keep in mind, compliance checklist. And one thing that I forgot to put on here as well was the CBAA free health check, governance health check. So that's an online tool that you can do. It's on our website. It's designed to be done at a board level, so maybe at a board meeting. You can go through and you can assess your station's governance. And it's a great little tool to give you a report afterwards. It'll tell you what areas it thinks that maybe you could do some work on or provide you with resources. And that could be a really good thing to include in your process, your station's process, for ensuring, as Amy said, you're not leaving it to the last minute. That's when the license renewal can get really stressful, and we don't want our community broadcasters to be stressed. That's the one thing we try to avoid. So if you think about that long-term planning, the CBAA governance health check could really help you in that. Before we get on to questions, because I can see a few great one is coming up, I just wanted to reiterate 3 or 4 final points to help you in your license renewal journey. Plan ahead. I think that's the biggest one. Keep a folder. Make sure your board and your station manager and whoever's involved in the process knows where it is. Make sure all your documents are saved there, and that you're really thinking ahead of that 5-year period to make it as easy as possible for you. In terms of the form, read it carefully and provide clear answers. That will really help make that renewal an easy process. And finally, ask the CBAA for help. Danny and I would love to chat to you. We'd love to help you through your renewal. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. I think Danny will probably jump back in now, but maybe nominate a few questions, and we'll go through some great questions.
I think it very much is question time at the moment. I will turn on the mic for you, Amy. James Ardle asks, 5 years ago, our application was being assessed in regarding to membership numbers against metro stations. We have 100 members in a city of 50,000, and we were asked questions based on station averages, which were much higher. This was not apples with apples. Are we going to have a similar process this year?
I can't speak for 5 years ago. Usually our processes are about using CBAA data and comparing like with like. Maybe Phyllis may have something to add on that, but as I said, what we're doing now is about making sure that you're compared with people that are in a similar situation, and we understand that if you have a smaller population, you might have different numbers in membership and volunteers.
We do take that into account because while we do a comparison, the first stage of the assessment is of how you are doing, how your station is doing. So sometimes the stations will tell us that there's been a downturn in their license area, the economy has dropped or whatever. We take that into account, and we rely on you to give us the information that is up to date, because the population figures that we have actually rely on what is given in the census data. So if you have more relevant information that you've been able to put together, then it's up to you to justify that to us. But it is for the whole license area and not just the town or just the populated areas. You need to give us the information for your whole license area.
Excellent. Colleen, turn my microphone on. Colleen, you ask a question that's in regards to sort of interpersonal relationships at a board level. That is probably not an ACMA question, but more a CBAA question. So if you want to email me, I'm just going to put my email address in the chat box now, and it should sort of allow you to make contact right away. I would be more than happy to have a chat to you about that one. That's dchifley@cbaa.org.au. Erica from 3K&D, Cool and Deadly in Melbourne, asks sort of why do stations like hers, which is licensed to serve an Aboriginal community, has a different sort of renewal process to remote Indigenous media organisations?
The remote Indigenous media organisations, they came across from the old Broadcasting Act and in 1992, and we treat them quite differently because they are in remote areas. It's very difficult for them to operate along the same lines as many of you in metro or regional or suburban areas would be able to operate. They don't have access to the facilities. Communication is very difficult. And a lot of the licenses that were held by the local shire councils or the regional councils have now just about all been transferred to a remo. And that's because the remos are best placed to contact all the people who are within that particular remote area and put forward a license renewal application. So we generally try to, and the complaints are very few. We generally have no complaints from remote indigenous licenses, whereas all the complaints that we get are from stations in metro and regional areas.
Okay, there is. Oh, what do I keep forgetting to turn my microphone off? Did I say I thought I'd been in community radio for 20 years? Heather Dunn asked the question that Amy mentioned, that the comparison is made between our station and other similar stations. She sort of states that they're a sub-metro in Adelaide and they have a smaller community pool to draw from than, for example, a sub-metro in Sydney. Is that sort of, I don't know if you might have sort of elaborated everything on that point that you could possibly have said.
Look, I mean, as Phyllis said, we're looking at license data and census data, and we are trying to compare like with like. I mean, you will have different demographics within a license area, though, not just numbers. So we understand that you're unique. We do have to make some point of comparison because it's essentially a way of telling whether you're managing okay or if you're struggling a bit. And ultimately, if there are really big discrepancies, I think that's where we're more concerned. If there's some differences between your metro, sub-metro and a Sydney sub-metro, then that's not surprising. It's about where we see surprising or unexpected results where there's potential for concern. So I don't think you should we don't actually see everybody as being some kind of cookie cutter thing. We do take into account the individual characteristics of your station and your license area.
I think I'll just jump in there on one point. It was a peak year for license renewals the last financial year, or the previous financial year. And we renewed 140 of the licenses. About half of those actually got letters proposing or suggesting actions that they could implement, so that if they took those actions, then when you actually come back with your next license renewal application, hopefully, as Amy said, you won't need another of those letters. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important that you give us the information that you think is important to distinguish you from somebody, as you say, in a Sydney suburban or a Melbourne suburban area. And we rely on that, and we don't just say, oh, this is what's in the census, or this is what's in the CBAA research, and that's what we're going to hold you to.
And in the end, ultimately, what we really want is to see that you have healthy membership numbers and healthy volunteer numbers. So it's not just about, comparisons. It's not a race or a contest. It's about making sure that you guys are aware of whether you're trending up, trending down, whether you are sustainable, whether you have plans to improve your numbers, to reach out more to your community. And those are things that are really important. So as Phyllis said, your community best, and you're the best people to tell us all about their characteristics and who's and what their needs are and demographics. But really, we just sort of want to see that you're conscious that your numbers are viable now and into the future, so that you can keep operating and keep providing a great service that you do to the people in your area.
Can I also just say that it's not about your listeners. It's not a popularity contest. And last year we did not renew 2 services. One was a very popular one. And the fact of the matter was that when we assessed the renewal, there were a string of non-compliance issues. So we will put forward recommendations to the authority to not renew a license if we find that there are continuous problems. So I don't think any of you are in that category, or you would have already heard from us.
Ken Tucker asks, how have social media platforms changed the information we provide about community engagement? Which is a very good question, because I mean, I guess you can sort of count how many likes you've got on your Facebook as a way of saying that you've got community engagement. But I'm assuming that that sort of thing is something that you guys will take into account and will accept as part of the renewal applications that you receive.
Yes, we do. If you tell us that you're on Facebook and you have Twitter accounts, a lot of the stations now have their own websites, things that were not there, say, 5 years ago. We will look at that as a means of engagement. But I think it is important to realize that not everybody is online, and not everybody is able to access online materials. So getting out there, talking to your community in person, or holding functions, and just paper on the street, those things are still very important.
Excellent. There is another couple of questions there in regards to, I guess, sort of how you might sort of gauge stations' engagement with their audience. One from James and a bit of a follow-up from Erica. I might just leave them for a little bit and we'll come back to those ones because I don't know if there's sort of much more information they can provide on those points, but obviously sort of we're happy to be a middleman in those questions for the next little while. But Bonnie Allen asks the question, and I think I might even be able to answer this one, where she can find the list of requirements for the different genres and amounts of each style of music that need to be played. Now, that would be something where you'd look at sort of judging by the process of elimination. I'm assuming that you're probably licensed to serve a general community of interest. As such, I would suggest that the music and content playlisted on your station be reflective of the people that are in your community. That sort of means just if there's a lot of young people in your area, play some music that young people might be into. I wouldn't know what that is. I haven't met a young person for a very long time. Country music, I would suggest, is the most popular genre in the nation. And so you've got to have a country music show on your community radio station. We better not turn this into an argument as to whether country music is good or not. It is good. All genres of music are good. But yeah, if you're a general station, then you would hope that the music that you play would be a cross-section of all different genres of music. And I think a lot of that would be determined by the people who get involved with the station, because certainly you'd assume that there might be someone there who wants to have a heavy metal program. So you'd want to have that in there. A hip-hop music show, want to have that in there as well. Hopefully, Bonnie, that does answer the question. I was just having a look at what other stations of a similar size to your own have on their playlist and balance that out with what people there in your community who are involved in the station want to play on the station.
And Bonnie, I'm just going to jump in there as well to say that the Station Community Engagement Survey that we offer is one excellent way that you can find out what your community of interest is into, other than, of course, the ways that Danny just suggested. So the Station Community Engagement Survey has a whole list of genres in there, and it asks respondents to put in their favourite genres. And I guess this is going back to how you can ensure that your community of interest is represented by asking them. Back to you, Danny.
Thanks, mate. David Donnelly from 2CBD in Glen Innes has a couple of questions that they're programming ones that I'll probably let our representatives from the ACMA handle. The current spoken word content guideline, would I be correct in assuming that that would be something that would be reflective of the needs of your community as well?
I'm not sure what you mean by the guideline.
You know how you got your 168 hours. So there's the spoken word, there wouldn't be a sort of set amount of hours of spoken word content that they need to have in your weekly program grid. And it'd be more sort of something that would be, you'd have the spoken word programming that would reflect the needs of your community.
Absolutely, reflecting the needs of your community as diagnosed by your station community engagement survey, or what other tools you might use to find out what your community wants. It's really going to vary a bit from station to station. We do like to make sure that there is some balance, and we do like to have a look at what other stations that are of a similar nature are doing. But if you can demonstrate to us that your community has spoken loudly about them wanting particular types of programming and particular genres of music, and you're meeting those needs and you can join the dots for us, that's what our primary concern is. But we do like to see some balance, but there's no fixed rule about any particular amount of spoken word versus music.
Excellent. David Donnelly also asks a pertinent question. Sorry, I didn't see this one. What time resource is required to complete the application? I would suggest that would be, like we've sort of gone through tonight, just a matter of being prepared and documenting everything. And in addition to the points that Holly made there about sort of making sure that you document everything that the station's doing to have it handy there for your license renewal, it's also great to have that stuff there if you're wanting to go for grants or something else, or something pops up where you need to come up with an organisational profile of what your station's doing to let people know the value of what you're providing to the community. So the answer to that one is, unfortunately, as long as a piece of string. But if you're there, if you're documenting everything and you realise that sort of the process is a long one, it's a long game, make sure that you're writing down, taking photos. If you're doing an outside broadcast anywhere, or going to the hardware store whose name we won't mention and sizzling some sausages there, take photos of all of that, put it online, keep them there up the sleeve for when you're doing your license renewal. So I guess the answer to that is, how long does it take to complete the application? 5 years. But hopefully it's sort of only an hour or so every week. Phil Ruck raises the point that I nearly went down the genre rabbit hole. Phil would say that. He does a dubstep program that goes for 16 hours. Good on you, mate. Erica from 3KND makes a very good point, though, although we sort of have to discuss sort of the way that the authority looks at the different things that stations are doing, and sort of comparisons between stations that are unique and varied. The fact that an Aboriginal station in Melbourne, their listeners culturally are different to the equivalent station in Sydney. And so would they be assessed separately? I would suggest that they probably very much would. And I'm getting nods here.
Every station is considered as a unique beast, and I'm sorry that I've freaked people out by the thought of comparison. We do really look at you guys as a whole, as in each station has its own unique characteristics, and is not just, it's more than the sum of its statistics. So please be aware that we know you have varied demographics, varied identities, varied community interests, and we are interested in what you can tell us about what those are and how you can show that you're meeting those needs. This is, as I said, when it comes back to it, our assessment is based on the sections that I showed you from the Broadcasting Services Act. And one of the primary things that we always think about is in your license condition, you have to serve your community interest and that you're licensed to serve. And so you're the best people to show us what that is and how you're putting those pieces of the puzzle together to meet that interest.
And Eric has just written, so we just need to explain how we meet our community needs. And I'd say the answer is very much a resounding yes to that one.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that 3KND.
Can I also I'll just jump in there. If your community, I talked about earlier about your community changing. And if you find that your community has changed over the last 5 years, and the information you've been collecting demonstrates that when you apply for your license renewal, please apply to change your community interest to reflect something that might be more appropriate to your license area. I think at the end of the day, you are open, accessible, and responsive to the people in your license area. So if there are particular demographics, socioeconomic characteristics that are particular to your license area, it's up to you to tell us and convince us about that. And that's how we would assess your application. So on what you give us at that particular point in time. Quite a few licensees have applied to change their community interest, and I really congratulate them for doing that, because they actually have monitored the changes in their license area and come to us to change that community interest. So just bear that in mind.
Diane from 4YU in Rockhampton. G'day, Diane. How are you going? What are the thoughts of people who work at a station wanting to play their own music and that of their friends for sort of, say, a local country music club? I would suggest that would be an internal programming policy that would, for the most part, prevent someone from doing that, because you can't really use your platform on community radio for self-promotion like that. And I would suggest that sort of that as well as being something where it wouldn't be adequately serving your community of interest, I don't think it'd be best practice either, because I'm in a band and I wouldn't play it on radio. That doesn't serve anyone's community of interest.
Oh, come on. What about my community, Danny?
Yeah, well, it's a community of one.
And Phil Ruck has a great question there in regards to the earlier conversation about how do we explain the needs of our communities. Is this where census data is handy? Yeah, Phil, census data is definitely one aspect of that to show that your community may be changing. And I guess a takeaway would be that you need to show who your community is and what their needs are, and that's just using as much detailed information as possible. So whether that's the Australian census, whether that's your own surveying, whether you hold focus groups to get people to come in and you ask them questions, there's lots of different ways that you can do this, and just having that detailed information at hand, because as ACMA said, there's over 400 services across the country, and they might not have been to your station or heard your amazing programming or know your area. So if you can document that clearly with information from censuses, from data, from hard data, whichever that may be, that will really come in handy.
Yes, sometimes I feel very disappointed when I look at a license renewal application and all the information provided supports a totally different community interest, and it's not my place to tell the station what their community interest should be. And I would dearly love if the station had applied to change it.
James Ardle, I wanted to come back to sort of the points that you brought up before. You sort of said that as a Christian-focused station, although you sort of live in like a area where the population is 50,000, that your possible catchment would be around 3,000 active churchgoers. Hopefully the answers that have been provided have sort of reflected it as, like, if the information that you're giving to the ACMA lets them know that this is your actual community of interest and you're accurately able to sort of translate that info, that hopefully it'll be a more positive experience for when you'll do your license renewal again, which will be in 2019, if my maths is correct. Well, actually, you'd be starting it now, wouldn't you?
If it's a religious Christian community interest, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I'm assuming so.
If that is the case, and we look at the census data, we look at all denominations of Christianity, not just a particular one. So when you talk about a population of 50,000 and you say 4,000 are going to, who are active, then a lot, if I remember correctly, about 2/3 of licensed area population in most cases identify as Christian. So you need to be reaching out to all that community and not just a particular denomination.
All right, well, that'll be one that you'll be wrestling with, I imagine, at some stage this year, if the maths on that one is correct. We are coming up to, we've only got about 5 minutes or so of the session to go. I should point out that our next webinar on the 29th of August, which is going to be 5 weeks from now, it's a long month, August, is going to be in regards to finding skilled volunteers. There will be more information of that forthcoming in all of the follow-up material that we send everyone. If you did miss any of tonight's webinar, there will be a recording of it that will be made available. Erica asks, what's the best contact numbers to reach the ACMA? I'm going to get that from your website. Do you guys know it off the top of your head?
02-9334-7922. That's the phone number to ring, and the email address is communitybroadcasting, all one word, at acma.gov.au.
Okay, I know the email address. I'm just going to write this down in the log so people can get them.
And I'll just mention that with the phone number and the email address, It's accessible to anyone in our team. So basically, you don't have to be concerned about whether you've spoken to someone in particular before. We will all be able to access it and allocate it to the right person. With the phone number, you can leave a voicemail. Please leave enough information so that we know how to get back to you and who you are.
What was the number again? 029
9334
Yep.
7922.
It's a catchy number.
Yeah.
You guys should be delivering pizzas. There you go. I've put that number up, 02933479922. Teresa asks, we'll probably get in another question, can the footprint area be adjusted? I'm assuming you're talking about your license area plan. And I think that's a bit more of that's kind of a bigger question, because that's not so much to do with your license, that's sort of a frequency spectrum plan.
Your service should be covering your whole license area. What we generally find, some licenses do not cover their whole license area. For example, there might be a hill or something that is preventing people from the other side from receiving your signal. If you're not in a spectrum congested area, you sometimes can apply for an STL to be able to extend your signal. If you actually want to change your license area to enlarge it or reduce it, you need to complete the Form 92 and submit that to the ACMA. And that's not to our section, but to another section. The details are on the form, and that's Form B92.
And that form will be available via the link that I gave there. This might be the last.
Can I just tell you that there is a long, long list of B92s, and it is highly unlikely that you will get a look in for the next 3 years.
Yeah, I say make the best of what you have is probably a good rule, a good way to start. Just think about whether your listeners are actually covering all of your existing license area plan, whether you are actually reaching the people that you've already got in your catchment before you try and expand your reach and start imagining that you want to grow bigger geographically. A lot of people find that they haven't really tapped the resources even within the existing license area. So do try and reach out to those fringes of your existing area first.
And this might be the last question. Kay Rawlinson asks, our station does a large number of phone requests, and they list where the caller comes from. Do these sort of statistics factor into community engagement and surveying and stuff? They're probably not very hard data, but I would imagine there would certainly be nothing wrong with trying to find some way to catalogue it. It'll just be the thing with when you're presenting a radio program, you don't really have time to scratch yourself. But if you've got a way, if you can get yourself a map of town and pin that up on the wall, get a texter, point to where that's coming from, that might just be as good market research internally as it would be externally for your license renewal or anything else like that. Any market research that you as a station can generate will be of value to you for painting a picture of what your community's like.
And I want to just echo those comments there before we head off for tonight. Actually, just repeat something that Phyllis said earlier, which I think sums it up really nicely, that as a community broadcaster, you must be open, accessible, and responsive. And that's really what the license renewal process is about, just ensuring that your station is doing those things. And that ultimately is why we're here as community broadcasters. So on that note, I think we might be done.
We are. Thank you so much, everyone, for being involved. Thank you so much to our guests from the ACMA.
Thanks for having us.
The first slide this evening was the 2018 CBAA conference. We're going to see you guys there, putting you on the spot now.
See us there.
Excellent. That's great. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Next webinar, 29th of August, finding skilled volunteers. Don't just limit it to skilled volunteers, otherwise I would have never got a shot in community broadcasting. But good on you. You're all a bunch of legends. Thanks so much for joining us here. Keep on serving those communities. You're doing great work. And although it might be a bit difficult to have to go through the license renewal process, it is necessary. It's going to paint an excellent picture of what your station does. And it's just going to help you serve your local community for the next 5 years, or 1 year if you're a TCBL. Take care, everyone. We'll catch you next time.